Good morning and welcome to the Midweek Mini. If you listened to yesterday's episode of Mystery, Murder, and Magic, you know that I talked about several of the great mysteries that have never been solved over the years. And you know that I also mentioned there are several mysteries that I was saving for their own individual episodes. So today, I'm going to be talking about one of those, and it's the mystery of what happened to Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart was born on July 24th, 1897 in Atchison, Kansas. She was the daughter of Samuel and Amy Earhart and was the second child born to the couple because sadly the couple had had a stillborn baby before Amelia. But several years later, Amelia became a big sister. At a very young age, Amelia developed this love of adventure. And I believed her mom had a big hand in that because Amy didn't believe in raising her girls to be so-called nice little girls. Amelia and her little sister Grace, they didn't wear dresses like the other little girls in the neighborhood. They wore bloomers. And honestly, I feel like that was a lot easier to play in than dresses. But because of their rough and tumble childhood, some writers have classified Amelia as a tomboy. And you know what? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I was actually a bit of a tomboy growing up. But anyway, Amelia's first experience at flying came when, with the help of her uncle, they built a ramp that was attached to the roof of the family's tool shed. And it somewhat resembled a roller coaster that Amelia had seen on a trip to St. Louis. She used a wooden box for her sled, and after she crash landed, she exclaimed that it was just like flying. And she did come out of it with torn clothes and a bruised lip, but she didn't let that stop her. And when she was 10, her dad's job moved the family to Des Moines, Iowa, and it was there that she saw her first airplane at the Iowa State Fair. However, she wasn't very impressed by it because, as she described it, it was a thing of rusty wire and wood and not interesting at all. Well, after that, the family made several more moves, and after it was apparent that the family was about to move again, Amy packed up her girls and moved into a home with some of her friends in Chicago. In 1916, Amelia graduated from Hyde Park High School. And through the years, Amelia had kept a scrapbook with clippings and pictures from newspapers that detailed women who had prevailed in mostly male-dominated careers, and she knew that she wanted to be like them one day. Well, over Christmas break in 1917, Amelia visited her sister, who was now living in Toronto. And while she was there, she saw the wounded soldiers returning home from World War I. So she decided to take some nurses' aid training through the Red Cross and began working with the Voluntary Aid Detachment at Spadina Military Hospital. Now, the following year, the Spanish flu pandemic reached Toronto, and while she was still working in the hospital, she actually became a patient herself because she had pneumonia and sinusitis. Now, it wasn't just your normal sinusitis either. She was actually hospitalized for about a month, but was sick in total for about 2 months. And it was during her recovery that she took a strong interest in the flight industry when she and a friend visited a local airfield in Toronto. And while they were there was an exhibition flight by World War I flying ace. And that pilot must have seen Amelia and her friends sitting and watching and decided to have a little fun with them by diving the plane towards them. Maybe he thought the women would run, but not Amelia. She stood her ground. And she is quoted as saying that, "I believe that little red airplane said something to me," as it swished by. In 1920, her parents reunited in California, so Amelia joined them there. Shortly after Christmas that year, Amelia and her dad they took a trip to Doherty Field, and a pilot by the name of Frank Hawks took Amelia for a ride that would ultimately change her life. She said that when they reached an altitude of 200 or 300 feet, she knew that she had to fly, and she was determined to learn to. She worked a wide assortment of odd jobs to save up the $1,000 that was needed for flying lessons. And soon she was taking her first lesson from Netta Snick, who was a pioneering woman in the aviation industry. 6 months later, she bought a second-hand yellow Kenner Airster biplane that she named the Canary. And several months after buying the Canary, she flew it to an altitude of 14,000 feet, setting a world record for female pilots. And then in 1923, Amelia became only the 16th woman in the United States to be issued a pilot's license. That license number was 6017. Now, financially, the 1920s were hard on everyone, and Amelia wasn't immune to that. Her inheritance from her grandmother quickly shrank, and she was forced to sell the Canary and another Kenner that she had bought, and she purchased a vehicle. And remember that sinusitis I mentioned earlier? She started having issues with it again, and it was during this time. And she had to be hospitalized again for surgery, but that surgery wasn't successful in alleviating her issues. And her parents ended up divorcing in 1924. Shortly after that, Amelia set out in the car she had bought on a trip across the country, and she even made a detour to Alberta, Canada. But eventually, she made it to Boston, Massachusetts, where she had another sinus procedure that was this time more successful than those that she had had in the past. While living in Medford, Massachusetts, she continued to love aviation, and she became a member of Boston's chapter of the American Aeronautical Society, and she was even elected as the chapter's vice president. Denison Airport was what we could call Amelia's home airport at that time, and she even invested in its operations with a decent amount of money. She was actually the first pilot to fly out of the Denison Airport, and to support herself at that time, she was a sales rep for Kenner Aircraft, and she was a writer for local newspaper columns, and she would often promote flying in those newspaper columns that she wrote. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh made his first solo flight across the Atlantic, and this inspired a woman named Amy Guest to be the first woman to do that. But soon she backed out because she thought it was too dangerous for her, but she would sponsor a project for that. So Amy set out looking for, quote, another girl with the right image. Now, Amelia was busy at work one day, and she received a call from Captain Hilton H. Rayleigh and asked her if she would like to fly the Atlantic. Well, how could Amelia turn that down? Amelia was interviewed by the project's committee, and she was asked to fly with Wilmer Stoltz as a passenger, but also with the duty of keeping the flight logbook. And they departed from Newfoundland on June 17, 1928, and landed 20 hours and 40 minutes later, sorry about that, in South Wales. And when the crew returned to the United States on July the 6th, they were greeted with a grand parade in Manhattan. And that was followed by a reception hosted by President Calvin Coolidge at the White House. Amelia had become quite a celebrity, and she spent the next couple of years on a lecture tour. She authored a book. Plus, she was the spokesperson for products such as luggage, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and women's clothing. The money she earned from the Lucky Strike campaign was donated to Richard Byrd's South Pole expedition. So not only was she a great adventurer herself, she supported others who wanted to explore also. All of these celebrity endorsements helped finance her passion for flying. In 1929, she became one of the first aviators to promote commercial aviation. And she was a major pioneer, in fact, figure in the commercial airline industry. So yes, Amelia was so much more than the woman who completely vanished. In August of 1928, she became the first woman to fly solo across North America. And back from this and other accomplishments, her skills grew more and more, and we have been joined by Ariel. In 1929, General Lee Wade flew with her and later said that Amelia was, quote, a born flyer with a delicate touch on the stick. Now, her list of accomplishments go on and on. In 1931, she set a world altitude record of 415 feet in a plane that was owned by Beech Nut Chewing Gum. And y'all, I hadn't even thought about that chewing gum in a long time. They even still make that. I don't know. Anyway, Amelia had this love life too. She had been engaged to Samuel Chapman. He was a chemical engineer, but Amelia broke off the engagement in November of 1928. Now, I'm not sure if this is why, but during that time, she spent a lot of time with George P. Putnam. He was a publisher. And the year after she broke things off with Chapman, Putnam had divorced and sought out Amelia. He actually proposed to Amelia 6 times before she said yes, and they were married on February the 7th, 1931. On the day of her wedding, she wrote a letter that was handwritten by her to Putnam, and in it she basically told him that she would not be the subservient wife, and at times she may need to go somewhere just to be alone. I guess the spirit of adventure wasn't going to let Amelia stay at home being the little housewife. I think it's really cool that she laid it out before they tied the knot, and it was very open-minded for those times. And after they were married, Amelia kept her maiden name. And as an interesting note, Putnam had previously been married to a woman named Dorothy Benny. She was the daughter of the man whose company, Benny and Smith, they invented the Crayola crayons. Cool, huh? But on the morning of May 20th, 1932, Amelia flew out of Newfoundland, and her intention was to land in Paris just as Charles Lindbergh had. But nearly 15 hours of flying and dealing with strong winds, icy conditions, and mechanical issues, she had to make an emergency landing on a farm in Northern Ireland. For that flight, she earned the Distinguished Flying Cross from Congress, the Cross of the Knight of the Legion of Honor from the French government, and the Gold Medal of the National Geographic Society from President Herbert Hoover. She and Eleanor Roosevelt became great friends after this, and Amelia's accomplishments and taking a flight with Amelia inspired Ms. Roosevelt to acquire a student permit for flying instruction, but she never really followed through with learning to fly. But that's pretty cool. I didn't know that about Eleanor Roosevelt. In late November of 1934, while Amelia was away at a lecture engagement, a fire broke out at her and Mr. Putnam's home. With that, the couple decided to move to the West Coast, and George became the head of the editorial board at Paramount Pictures. And while he was doing this, Amelia was improving her flying skills as far as long-distance flying was concerned. And she sought out the help of Paul Mance. And by late 1935, she's not the race car driver, Earhart, and Mance had formed a partnership and established the Earhart-Mance Flying School. Also in 1935, she became a visiting faculty member at Purdue University. And while there, she was an advisor in the aeronautical engineer department and also a career guide for the female students there. She really paved the way for women, not just in the aeronautics area, but in general. And she was a member of the National Women's Party and a strong supporter of Equal Rights Amendment. The following year, Amelia started planning for a flight around the world. Now, yes, others had done it before, but the route that Amelia was to take was 29,000 miles, and it followed the equator. As part of the planning process, a Lockheed Electra 10E was built to Amelia's specifications. Amelia and her small crew started their first attempt on March 17, 1937. The first leg of the trip was from Oakland, California to Honolulu, Hawaii. Due to a mechanical issue with the propeller hubs, they spent additional time there in Honolulu getting that fixed. And the next destination for this flight was supposed to be Howland Island, but because of an issue at takeoff, they never left the airfield. The aircraft was severely damaged, so the flight had to be canceled, and the plane was shipped by ocean to Lockheed in Burbank for repairs. While the plane was being repaired, Amelia and George secured funds and started preparing for a second flight. There was also a change in route for this second attempt, meaning this time Amelia would fly from west to east. When the second attempt got underway, they decided not to publicize anything about it. She flew out from Oakland and made her first stop in Miami, Florida. Once she was in Miami, she made it publicly known that she was attempting once again to circle the globe. On June the 1st, she and Fred Noonan departed Miami, and between June 1st and June 29th, the two made stops in South America, Africa, Asia, and Lae, New Guinea. Now, I should mention that Fred Noonan was her navigator. And by the time she had completed, or by then, she had completed 22,000 of the 29,000 miles. So it would seem that she was on the home stretch. The remaining 7,000 miles of the journey would be over the Pacific Ocean. So on July the 2nd, the two departed from Lae, headed for Howland Island. The flight was to take somewhere around 20 hours and was expected to land on Howland the next morning. Around 3 p.m. Lae time, Amelia reported that her altitude was 10,000 feet, but was going to reduce that because of thick cloud coverage. Then around 5 p.m. that same day, Amelia reported that her altitude was 7,000 feet, and that was basically the last time that she was heard from. At that point, it was known that she had traveled around 800 miles after she had taken off. The U.S. Coast Guard had a cutter stationed near Howland Island that had been tasked with guiding Amelia to the island once they were in the area. And according to radio logs, there was some miscommunication, partly due to faulty equipment, and the other part was due to Amelia not understanding the workings of the radio system in the airplane that had just been installed before they took off. Before 8 a.m. on the morning that she was due to land on Howland Island, a transmission said that she couldn't hear the cutter and asked them to send voice signals. Those on the cutter said that this was the loudest transmission from Earhart and Noonan, meaning that they were somewhere close by in the area. Still trying to signal the plane in, smoke signals were sent from the cutter, but apparently Earhart and Noonan didn't see them because of the clouds. The last voice transmission received on Howland Island showed that they were flying in a position that they believed passed by the island, but they never landed. Many theories on what happened to Earhart and Noonan have emerged over the years. Those theories range from the logical that they crashed and sank to like conspiracy theories. And one of those conspiracy theories is that Earhart and Noonan had been captured by Japanese forces. Even a CBS correspondent published a book in 1966 saying that they had been captured and executed when they crashed on the island of Saipan. And in 1990, Unsolved Mysteries aired an episode where a woman from Saipan claimed she witnessed the execution of Earhart and Noonan. But none of these claims have ever been proven to be true, though. Now, just as many of the other mysteries I've talked about on this podcast, I believe this is one of those that we won't have answers to in our lifetime. But don't hold me to that, because that could change. It would be awesome to know what happened to Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan, too. And in all honesty, I believe they crashed somewhere in the Pacific, and their airplane just hasn't been detected. But I would love to know what y'all think happened to Amelia as she flew over the Pacific Ocean. I would just love to hear your ideas and theories of what happened on that flight. And you can tell me on our social media pages, and you can find the links for those in this episode description. Well, until next time, y'all have a great week.